The bells ringing in King's Landing is a sound associated with multiple things: horror, the death of a king, the city under siege, and Daenerys Targaryen and Drogon burning Westeros' capital to the ground. What they don't typically mean is surrender, as per Davo Seaworth himself, though that's what Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5, fittingly titled The Bells, used them for. The sound was supposed to mark the end of Daenerys' attack, but instead spurred her on, leading to one of the most controversial parts of Game of Thrones' ending. Given the bells ringing for horror, a dead king, a city under siege, and, as Tyrion notes, wedding, comes from varies as far back as Game of Thrones Season 2, Episode 9, Blackwater, then it's certainly confusing why they were used that way ahead of Daenerys destroying King's Landing in Season 8. But the idea itself, not only of Dany's villain turn and assault, but specifically the bells, could have derived from George R.R. Martin and his plans for the books, which could be seen when The Winds of Winter releases. What the bells in King's Landing will mean in The Winds of Winter, Theory explained. They could be important for a character Game of Thrones cut. I think it's quite plausible that Daenerys destroying King's Landing will happen in the books in some way, likely in The Winds of Winter, but possibly a dream of spring. Much like Bran Stark becoming king, it feels like too monumental a twist to not have come from what he outlined to showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. It also fits with his ethos and themes in A Song of Ice and Fire, morally grey characters, exploring the human heart in conflict with itself, the corrupting influence of destiny, prophecy, and power, the devastating force of dragons, and so on. However, given Cersei Lannister is not quite as important in the books as she was in Game of Thrones, then it's hard to imagine her being the final boss-type villain Dany comes to defeat. Instead, it's more likely that when Dany arrives in Westeros, there's someone else on the Iron Throne, Aegon Targaryen, the long-thought-dead son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, who, allegedly, was smuggled out of King's Landing, swapped with another baby, and is now returning to Westeros to claim his birthright. That's who Dany will probably face, and who will be her opposition if and when King's Landing is destroyed. Alongside Aegon is his closest advisor and father figure, Jon Connington. He was once hand to the Mad King, Aerys II Targaryen, and a best friend of Rhaegar, and it's with him that the bells in King's Landing could be important, and where the kernel of the idea to use them in Game of Thrones Season the 8th of May have stemmed from. During Robert's rebellion, Jon fought in the Battle of the Bells, so called for the bells that rang out at Stony September to warn of the battle. It was an important conflict in the rebellion, and a major defeat for the Targaryen loyalists. Although it was early on, the victory for Robert spurred his forces on, and proved the rebels could and would not be easily dealt with. As punishment for the loss, Aerys stripped Jon of his lands, and the former hand went into exile across the Narrow Sea, where it's widely believed by those still in the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros that he died. However, he is very much still alive, and still scarred by the Battle of the Bells that, to me, nicely foreshadows the bells ringing again in King's Landing. The express purpose wouldn't necessarily be that, of course, but it'd be easy to have them start ringing for a city under siege when Daenerys attacks. Jon, hearing the bells, could be driven to madness by them, alongside the grayscale he has contracted. Jon Connington and the bells can add to Daenerys burning King's Landing. The Winds of Winter can make them better. Daenerys and Drogon destroy King's Landing in Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5, The Bells. In terms of the bells specifically, that they'll form part of Jon's story can make them a much more effective tool than the confusing use of them in Game of Thrones. Jon is a point-of-view character in A Dance with Dragons, and so, assuming this battle goes down in The Winds of Winter, we should get to see at least some of it from his perspective and gain a much greater understanding of it.